The voice on my phone said, "This is Dr. Patricia Osei, Chief of Transplant Surgery at Toronto General. We need your answer in the next 4 minutes or we're moving the liver to another recipient." And my father-in-law was holding my phone, smiling at me. Let me back up. My name is Claire, and until 18 months ago I was nobody worth knowing. At least, that's what my father-in-law believed. I was the girl who married his son Daniel in a small ceremony at a conservation area outside Guelph. The girl who showed up to every family dinner with a bottle of wine nobody touched. The girl who always said thank you too many times and laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny because I wanted, desperately, to belong somewhere. My father-in-law, I'll call him Gerald because that's his name and he's earned the use of it, had built his entire sense of self around the fact that he'd started a plumbing supply business in Mississauga in 1987 and turned it into something regional by the time Daniel was in high school. He was anti-goifters approximately once every 40 minutes. He had opinions about mortgages, about which neighborhoods in the GTA were still worth buying in, about electric vehicles, about my career, dismissive, and about the kind of woman his son should have married, someone from the right family, which apparently meant someone he'd already met. I was a transplant coordinator at the University Health Network. I'd been doing it for 6 years. Most people, when I explain what that meant, would get quiet for a moment, because it means I'm the person who calls a grieving family in the middle of the night and asks them the hardest question they'll ever answer. It means I manage the bridge between death and the possibility of life. It means I know exactly how many hours a liver stays viable outside the body, how many minutes matter, how many families have sat in a hospital hallway holding paper cups of coffee and not drinking them because drinking coffee would mean time was still passing normally. Gerald thought I worked in hospital admin. I corrected him once. He nodded and said, "Right, the way you nodded something a child tells you about their day." After that, I stopped correcting him. Daniel knew what I did. He was proud of me, genuinely. But Daniel had grown up in a house where Gerald's voice filled every room, and Gerald's opinion formed the weather system everyone else dressed for. Daniel loved me, and he also loved his father, and he had spent 34 years learning to keep those two things from colliding. He was good at it. Too good, maybe. The dinner was for Gerald's 65th birthday. Daniel's mother, I'll call her Helen, warm and tired in equal measure, a woman who communicated mostly through food and meaningful looks, had been planning it for 2 months. His sister Britt flew in from Vancouver. Extended family from all over the 905 filled the dining room. It was a Sunday in November, the kind of grey Sunday where the light gives up by 4 o'clock. I almost didn't go. I was on call rotation, which meant my work phone had to be within reach and charged and on the loudest possible setting at all times. I'd cleared it with my coordinator supervisor, told her I'd be at a family function, told her to reach me if anything came up. She said there was a potential match in the system, a donor situation evolving at a hospital in Hamilton. She said it probably wouldn't progress until Monday morning, but she'd keep me posted. Probably. I put my phone in my cardigan pocket. Daniel held my hand in the car and asked if I was okay, and I said yes. I was okay. I was going to eat roast beef and smile and get through it. Gerald greeted us at the door and looked at Daniel's coat and said, "Good, you finally got a real coat," and looked at my coat and said nothing. He shook my hand. Not a hug. Gerald did not hug me, had never hugged me in 4 years of marriage, offered instead this brief, dry handshake as though we were competitors meeting before a negotiation. At dinner, I sat near the end of the table, which was fine. Britt sat across from me and we talked quietly about her job, her apartment in Kitsilano, whether it was worth renewing her lease at those prices. Britt was easy. Britt had never had a problem with me. We'd once split a bottle of wine on a hotel balcony in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and she told me she thought her father had never really figured out how to see women as full people. She said it matter-of-factly, not bitterly, the way you describe a weather pattern. The problem started when Gerald asked what I'd been up to lately. It was the way he asked, like checking a box, like he already had the answer filed under "not much." I said I'd had a complicated week, that we coordinated 3 organ procurements in 5 days, that one of them was a pediatric case, that those were always the hardest. He said, so it's a scheduling job, basically, like an event planner but for surgeries. Britt put her fork down very carefully. I said, not exactly. He said he had a buddy who managed logistics for a medical supply company out of Oakville, that it was solid work, good pension, very organized guys in that industry. I said, that's nice. He said, Daniel, did you get that thing sorted with the contractor, the one I sent you? And just like that, I was gone. Not even worth the effort of a pivot. Just erased mid-sentence, mid-existence, and the table moved on to talking about Daniel's contractor and the baseboards and the bathroom renovation. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at it under the table. It was a text from my supervisor. Call me when you can. Getting closer on the Hamilton case. I typed back, can you give me 20 means? She replied, maybe. Recipient family is standing by at TGH. This could move fast. I excused myself quietly, said I had to take a quick work call, slid my chair back. Gerald was mid-story about a golf weekend in Muskoka and didn't pause. I went to the hallway near the front door where the coats were piled on a bench, and I called my supervisor. She walked me through it. The donor situation had progressed faster than expected. There was a match. A 31-year-old woman in Toronto who had been on the list for 14 months, whose condition had declined significantly in the last 3 weeks. The procurement team in Hamilton was ready. The surgical team at TGH was ready. The only piece left was consent confirmation from the donor's family, which the on-site coordinator was handling right now. My supervisor needed me to be reachable and ready to facilitate the recipient side communication the moment consent came through. I said, I'm here. Keep me posted. I'll stay close to my phone. She said, you okay? I know you're at a family thing. I said, I'm fine. This is the job. Call me. I went back to the table. I sat down. I ate 2 more bites of roast beef. Gerald was now in a story about the early days of the business, 1989 or so, a deal he'd nearly lost and then hadn't. He told this story at every dinner. Daniel had told me about it before I ever heard it in person. The table listened with the practiced attentiveness of people who know their role in a ritual. My phone buzzed again. Under the table, I looked at the screen. My supervisor, not a text this time, a call. I stood up. I'm so sorry, I have to take this. Oh, here we go. Gerald said it pleasantly, like a joke, but with his eyes on me and a smile that had nothing warm in it. Daniel's wife and her very important phone. A few people laughed softly. Uncomfortable laughter. The laugh of people who want attention to pass. I said, it's work, it's urgent. It's always urgent, Gerald said. That's how they get you. They make everything sound like an emergency so you can't ever turn it off. Gerald, Daniel said, quiet. I'm just saying. Some of us learn to leave work at the door. He looked around the table for confirmation. A couple of the older uncles nodded slightly. It's Sunday. It's my birthday dinner. I don't think one night without the phone is too much to ask. I should have walked away. I know that now, and I think I knew it then. But I was 4 years into dinners like this, 4 years of smiling and shrinking and saying you're right, of course, and something in me was just very tired. I said, Gerald, someone might die tonight if I don't take this call. He stared at me. I coordinate organ transplants, I said. When I get a call on this phone, it means a family has said yes. It means a surgical team is waiting. It means someone on a list, someone who has been waiting for months or years, might get to go home. That is what my job is. That is what it has always been. The table was completely silent. Gerald's jaw shifted. His face did the thing it does when he's been contradicted, this slight hardening, this recalibration, and he said, I'm sure it can wait 5 minutes, Claire. And he reached across and took the phone out of my hand. I don't think he thought about it. I don't think it was calculated. Eater shreeched over with the ease of a man who had always taken up whatever space was available to him, who had spent 65 years having his hand come out for things and finding things there, and he picked up my phone the way you pick up a television remote that's closer to someone else. The call was still active. He looked at the screen. I watched his face and he lifted it to his ear. I don't know exactly what he planned to say. Something dismissive probably, something that would establish that this was his table and his evening. What he heard instead was Dr. Patricia O'Shea, Chief of Transplant Surgery at Toronto General Hospital, saying, "Claire, I need your authorization code and I need you to confirm the recipient is in the building. We have consent. The procurement team is wheels up in 40 minutes. Talk to me." Gerald's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Dr. O'Shea said, "Claire, are you there?" Gerald lowered the phone very slowly. His face had gone a color I don't have a word for, not pale exactly, more like the color of someone who has just understood something they cannot ununderstand. He held the phone out to me like it had become a different object than the one he'd picked up. I took it. I said, "Dr. O'Shea, yes. Authorization code Bravo 77 Tango 4. Recipient is in the building. I'm confirming she is in-house. Let me step out and verify with the floor nurse." I walked to the hallway. I did my job. I was on the phone for 11 minutes. I confirmed the recipient was prepped and ready. I coordinated the timing communication between the Hamilton team and the Toronto surgical floor. I noted the call in the system log. I asked the floor nurse to update the recipient's family in the waiting room. When I came back to the dining room, the energy had shifted in the way a room shifts after thunder. Everyone still, everyone orienting. I sat down. I'd picked up my fork. Britt was looking at me with an expression I'll remember for a long time. Helen was looking at Gerald. Gerald was looking at his plate. Daniel put his hand on mine under the table. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then one of the uncles, Gerald's brother actually, a quieter man named Ron who worked in insurance and usually said very little, cleared his throat and said, "So you literally just helped save someone's life just now?" I said, "Hopefully, yes." Ron said, "Well," he picked up his wine glass, "Happy birthday, Gerald." It wasn't cruel. Ron didn't mean it cruelly, but it landed the way it landed and Gerald sat with it. The dinner ended without further incident. There was birthday cake. There were photos. Gerald thanked everyone for coming. He shook my hand at the door again. That same dry handshake, but this time there was something different in it. Not an apology. Gerald was not the kind of man who apologized directly, but his grip was lighter somehow, like he was holding something more carefully than he used to. In the car on the way home, Daniel was quiet for a few minutes and then he said, "I should have said something earlier. I've been saying that to myself for 4 years. I should have said something." I said, "You said something tonight." He said, "One word, I said your name." I said, "It was enough." It wasn't entirely true. It wasn't entirely not true either. We were both tired and the night had been long and neither of us had the energy for the bigger conversation. That conversation came later, over the following weeks, slowly and not always easily. Daniel and I had things to figure out that weren't about Gerald at all. Things about how much of yourself you're allowed to protect and how much of someone else's family you can be expected to absorb and still recognize your own face. But that night, driving home on the 401 with the city lights coming up around us and the radio on low, I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years of those dinners. I felt like myself. 3 weeks later, I got a card in the mail, Hospital Stationery, Toronto General. Inside, in handwriting that had clearly taken some effort to make neat, was a message from the transplant recipient, a woman named Mariana, 31 years old, who had been on the waiting list for 14 months. She wrote, "I don't know who you are or what you did exactly, but the nurses told me there was a coordinator who made sure everything came together that night. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm going home on Friday. My daughter is 4. She kept asking when Mummy was coming home and now I get to tell her." I put the card on our fridge. Gerald came for Christmas dinner that year. He was quieter than usual. At one point in the kitchen while Helen was cutting pie, He stood next to me at the counter and looked at the card and read it without saying anything. He stood there for a long moment. Then he said, "That's a good job you have, Claire." Just that. I said, "Thank you, Gerald." It wasn't absolution, and I didn't need it to be. Some things you don't fix, you just slowly stop breaking them. I knew what I did. I'd known for 6 years. I'd known every time a family said yes in their worst moment, every time a pager went off at 2 a.m. And I got out of bed without hesitating every time I stood in a hospital hallway and told someone their person's life was going to mean something beyond what they'd lost. I didn't need Gerald to know it, but it didn't hurt that he finally did. I still think about the way Gerald held that phone out to me, the way his arm extended slowly, like the weight of it had changed while it was in his hand. For a long time, I told myself that moment was about him, about his embarrassment, his recalibration, whatever quiet reckoning happened behind his eyes when he heard Dr. O.C.'s voice. But the longer I sit with it, the more I understand it was really about me, about what I chose to do and not do in the years before that dinner, and what finally shifted when I stopped making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of what I should be. I spent 4 years absorbing Gerald's dismissal because I thought that was what love required. Patience with the people your partner came from, grace extended indefinitely, conflict avoided to keep the peace. And there's something honorable in that. Genuinely. I still believe you can choose to let things go without losing yourself. But I confused letting go with disappearing. I thought if I was quiet enough, agreeable enough, if I smiled through the handshakes and the hospital admin comments and the pivots mid-sentence, eventually he'd see me. That understanding would arrive on its own if I just waited long enough. It doesn't work that way. Gerald didn't see me until I stood still and told him exactly what he was looking at, not to wound him, not even to win. I said it because I was tired, and because it was true, and because somewhere in me I'd finally accepted that my work, those calls at 2 a.m., those 14-month waiting lists, those families standing in hallways deserved to be named out loud, even at a birthday dinner, even when the timing was inconvenient. That's the thing about integrity. It isn't loud or dramatic most of the time. It's just the quiet decision to not let your own life be misrepresented in front of people you care about. And the intelligence to know the difference between a battle worth having and noise not worth making. That matters too. I didn't go to that dinner looking for a confrontation. I went to eat roast beef and survive another Sunday. But when the moment came when Dr. Tifald's Osei's voice cut through the room and Gerald stood there, holding my phone like it had become something he didn't recognize, I was present enough to receive it. To step back in, take the call, do the work. That clarity didn't come from nowhere. It came from 6 years of learning what my work actually was, of sitting with grieving families at midnight, of understanding precisely what was at stake on every call. You don't stay sharp like that by accident. And the staying. The persistence through 4 years of handshakes instead of hugs, of being erased mid-sentence, of driving home on the 401 and saying I'm fine when I wasn't entirely. That took something too. Not stubbornness. Not martyrdom. Just a kind of steady refusal to stop showing up, to stop being good at something because someone at a dinner table didn't recognize it. Mariana's card is still on our fridge. I walk past it every morning. Some days it's just a card. Other days it's the whole reminder that the work was real, that the night was real, that I was real, whether Gerald understood it or not. He did, eventually, in his own quiet way, in a kitchen at Christmas, standing next to a fridge. That was enough.